But first of all, just to start things off, I want to thank everybody who is here for joining us tonight for the Grand Council of the Allied Masonic Degrees virtual speaker series. We've done a couple of these in the past. It's a program that we plan on continuing. Of course, we've got Dr. Brett Gordon with us here tonight to give us a presentation, which we are looking forward to. Before we get started, I do want to take the opportunity to bring greetings to all of you guys from our Sovereign Grand Master, Aaron Shoemaker. Unfortunately, he could not be with us today because he is traveling over to London for the Grand Council of Allied Masonic Degrees annual session in the UK. There's a number of the officers going over there. I myself will be leaving to go over there tomorrow, but since I was leaving a little later, he asked me to make sure that I brought his greetings to you guys during this online meeting. So he's wishing that he could be here, but of course there's a 6 or 7 hour time difference, and I think that he's probably fast asleep by now if he's smart. So with that being said, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Dr. Brett Gordon, who amongst his many Masonic titles and accomplishments is the Grand Superintendent for Florida South, and today he's going to be giving us a presentation on heraldry and Freemasonry, and I expect it to be very informative and enjoyable. So Brett, if you're ready, you can take it from there.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Let me just share my screen with everybody, and hopefully we'll be able to... Okay, so I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. It should say Heraldry and Masonry, a story and symbols. Let me just get my other little thing here so I have my notes. Okay, so first of all, let me tell you, John introduces me very eloquently and says, Dr. Brett Gordon, I am a university professor, so that's what my PhD is in. I have no degree in heraldry. It's just been a lifelong passion of mine. It is one of those arts and sciences that you could spend a lifetime, just like Freemasonry, a lifetime exploring and still not really understand it all, or each country does things a little different. So I'm going to try to give you just some background on heraldry, and let me give you our little slide there. This is our agenda for tonight. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what heraldry was, the origins of heraldry. I wanted to talk about something called bucket shop heraldry, which I guarantee when I tell you what it is, you're all going to go, I know what that is. Okay, great. We'll talk about the heraldic authorities, which are those that grant or matriculate arms to various people around the world. And we'll talk about some of the big ones that maybe you've heard of or maybe not. We'll talk about some heraldry basics, the idea of one man, one coat of arms, and the cadency that happens when you have children and so forth. We'll look at a little bit about corporate arms, and this is all going to lead us to looking at the relationship to Freemasonry with heraldry, and we'll look at some Grand Lodge arms, provincial Grand Lodge arms, down to the lodge arms. We're even going to look at 2 of our past sovereign Grand Masters in the United States who have been granted arms from 2 different heraldic authorities, and then we'll talk about pennons and banners and guidons and all that good stuff that you might see flying. And I've got some pictures of the Garter Chapel in England with some of the banners there, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Really, this is to show you that Freemasonry and heraldry are really very similar when you think about it. And that was one of the things I had been attracted to this before I joined a Freemason. As a little kid, I always liked this stuff. But once I joined Freemasonry, I really saw the connection. And it's only been recently that I even did something like this, and then was asked by the Grand Master and John to make a presentation. And I thought this might be nice. As we go through this presentation, since we are a small group, if you have any questions, I don't necessarily mind if you unmute yourself and ask me. I hope we don't take off on too much of a tangent. I will tell you, this is not a primer on heraldry. I'm not going to start explaining things because it really is kind of difficult. It's like asking somebody to explain Freemasonry. You can't do it in an hour or a day or a week. It takes a lot longer because you're just leaving too many things out. So let's get started. First of all, I want to say, what is Freemasonry? And I start off this because I want you to see some of the connections that happen in Masonry and in heraldry. So first of all, we could probably all say that Freemasonry is the oldest fraternity in the world. That would be a basic definition that we'd give to somebody. It's an outgrowth of the operative Masons, or at least that's what we we tell ourselves, whether you want to believe that legend or not. You know, we come from the cathedral builders. We talk about it being a progressive science of morality specifically, but a progressive science. Keep that word in mind. And then in our ritual, we say it's a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Again, illustrated by symbols. So keep that in mind. All this you'll see as we go forward. Now, my next slide, these are two working tools of an entered apprentice, and I'm sure everybody's very familiar with them, the common gavel and the 24-inch gauge. I know we're all Masons here, but I'm not going to talk about the secrets or anything like that. I just point out some things. We talk in our ritual about the gavel, the 24-inch gauge. We talk in other degrees about various tools and so forth, and we do two things in our ritual. Number one, we talk about their actual use, how 24-inch gauge, it's used to measure things. Obviously, the common gavel, you're striking it and taking off pieces of stone and so forth. But then we talk about the use that we as speculative Masons use it for, that symbolic meaning. So it's got not only the actual meaning, but it's got this symbolic meaning to it. And as we move forward in our presentation today, and we talk about heraldry, I want you to keep in mind that there is this actual meaning, and then there's this symbolic meaning that goes to it. Again, the coincidences between Freemasonry and heraldry. Now, what is heraldry? I've put up a couple of definitions here. These are both two heraldic artists. They've written, or actually there's three of them. They're Burnett and Dennis, and then Freyer. And they've written a lot of books. If you look up anything on heraldry, you'll probably find their names on something. The first one here, you can see heraldry is a fusion of fact, fancy, myth, manner, romance, and reality. It's kind of flowery language there. It's the exuberant union of family, art, history. It's the enduring, triumphal marriage of man and symbol. That sounds pretty cool. Then you got the more sublime, the one that actually hits exactly what it is, sort of like if you say, what is Masonry? Well, it's building buildings. It's the art of depicting armoral devices in paint, line, stone, glass, etc. So we've got two definitions there. Again, very much like Masonry, depending on who you are, what your purpose is, who you're talking to, who your audience, you may use a different definition to describe Masonry or Freemasonry. And so that's what we have here in heraldry. Now, I've got some other definitions. This one I highlighted or made it in bold black because this is from Macmillan Masonry. It's actually a stonemason group in the United Kingdom that builds buildings. And I kind of thought it was interesting that this organization, that's a real Mason organization that's building buildings and so forth, would actually have this as its definition. It's the shorthand of history, used to symbolize the proud heritage, achievements, and aspirations of individuals and private organizations alike. When we think about this, we'd probably say this is 100% true, because just like Masonry is building buildings. If I were to show you our Capitol building in DC, you would say, you know exactly what that is. Because of the stone that was used, because of the architecture, the way it was built, you know it's got a specific purpose. If I show you just the halls of justice, the Supreme Court, the same thing. Much different than if we go to your local lawyer who may or may not work out of his home or may work out of a small office. That's different than a business versus some major governmental building. Similar with churches throughout history, when Masons would build these churches, how they, what was on them sort of gave an air to, is this an important building? Is this a regular building? Is this some type of religious building? And then all the different markings they would put on it. Same thing in heraldry, and that's what this Macmillan Mason was talking about. It's a way to describe persons, places, events that happened to people or to an individual or to a group of individuals, and have that represented not necessarily in stone or in a building of bricks, but in an art form that you could recognize and in essence can be lived throughout history, just as some of the great cathedrals and buildings in and around the world. Now, Freemasonry, just like we've talked about in the past, can have some different things. You might look at Freemasonry as a science. You might look at it as an art. Heraldry is both a science and an art. If we look at it from the science, it has very specific rules. If you read a blazon, which is the description of a code of a person's coat of arms or a corporate coat of arms, it's going to have very specific words. They don't use the word green, they use the word vert. They don't use the word blue, they use azul. They talk about specific things so that if you know first quartering, second quartering, hatchments, all these different things, and you have to know what they mean. It's very specific. So it's just like Freemasonry. We have very specific rituals. We don't want to deviate. We say if there's a, one little deviation can spoil the whole system and so forth. So Freemasonry is very much a science. However, heraldry, just like Freemasonry, is an art. Even though the written language and rules are very strict, the interpretation is often up to, in heraldry, the artist or the person that is turning those written words into an actual graphic piece of information to be viewed by the rest of the world. Similarly, I can ask you, what does the first degree in Freemasonry mean to you? I will get, and I don't know how many people are on here, probably 10, 15, 20 of us, I will get 20 different answers completely, even though we have books that tell us this is what my Grand Lodge says it means. You as an individual are still going to say, I believe that a little bit, but I also believe this because I have other information or I understand something that that I've picked up from somewhere else. So it's both an art and a science in Freemasonry, both an art and a science in heraldry. And I wanted to talk to you about this for a second and show it to you in pictorial form. Hopefully you can see these two. Maybe you've seen them before. If you have, that's awesome. They are actually, and up until just a few months ago, they were the representation of Queen Elizabeth. They are now the representation of King Charles. And you would say, well, wait a minute, they don't look exactly alike. And for all the external stuff that's around them, they look similar. I mean, we can sit there and say, well, wait a minute, they both have a unicorn and a lion on each side, but on the one on the left, the unicorn's on the left and the lion's on the right, and vice versa on the one that's on the right. They've sort of switched places. If you look at what's surrounding the shield, in one, it looks like a belt buckle on the one on the right side. And on the other, it looks like these little green leaves and gold leaves going around and a different pendant hanging down from it. You would say, well, the helm looks very similar. Okay. The actual shield itself, it's got all the same symbols. But if we look and we say, let's look at the first and third quarter of the one on the left. That's the one with the red lion on the gold background. It's taking up two places, the first quarter and the third quarter. Then we have a red background in the second quarter of the shield, or sorry, first and fourth. In the second quarter of the shield, we have the gold lions, or as heraldic artists like to say, the leopards of England. And then you have down in that third quarter, you have a harp, which obviously symbolizes Ireland. But it's kind of a little reversed in the one on the right. Ireland's in the same place, but now suddenly England is in the first and fourth quarter, and Scotland, the red lion, is now only depicted once. So what would this represent? Well, this is a way to depict the sovereign in two different countries. When the sovereign is in Scotland, their arms are those on the left-hand side. And Scotland has a place of preeminence. It's in the first and fourth. It shows the right or the left side is the beast of Scotland, which is the unicorn, and it has a crown on it, showing that Scotland was once a kingdom. And it's got the Order of the Thistle, which is what's surrounding it. That's that collar that is surrounding the shield there. When the sovereign is, however, in England, they use the English shield with place of preeminence, and therefore the leopards of England, the three lions there, are in the first and fourth, and the garter of the Order of the Garter is surrounding, which is the order of knighthood that is the highest order in the United Kingdom, but it is also the #1 order in England for a long time when the kingdoms were separated. So that's what's surrounding it. The thistle being the highest order in Scotland, and the second order in the United Kingdom. So you can see now that in essence we are depicting the same thing just in two different ways. And while this probably, I'm not going to say the same heraldic artist drew these, you can see some very good similarities. It was probably somebody who was trying to copy and not putting their own flair on it. But that's two different ways. That's the two different ways of depicting the same thing within heraldry. Now, to get back to our discussion a little bit on exactly what is heraldry. Well, number one, heraldry, it's not as old as we'd like to think in its current form, just like Masonry. You read some books on Masonry and, oh, Masonry goes back to the BC. Well, maybe, who knows? Maybe. I mean, it's certainly Masonry does, but maybe not Freemasonry. I don't know, maybe. And just like that, we have sort of insignia on shields of warriors, even in as early as the 9th century BC. Unfortunately, it wasn't some type of hereditary thing. So a father when he died, didn't turn over that personal identification to his sons and so forth. You can look in ancient Japan and you see some different, what we would classify as heraldic type ensigns and so forth on banners and on armor that the samurai wore. But if we're really talking about heraldry that we know today, we're probably talking more around the 1100s in England. Just like when we sort of say, when we're talking about Freemasonry today, we're probably talking right around the 1700s. Maybe we go back a little bit before that in some places in Scotland and so forth with some of the rituals and so forth, but we're certainly not looking at Freemasonry today like we did maybe 500-600 years ago. Similarly with heraldry, we don't see the same thing. The reason why heraldry came to this form in the 1100s is obviously knights started wearing helmets covering their faces. So there had to be a way to identify who this person was, whether friend or foe. And so they would paint a certain combination of colors or symbols on their shields, and they got more ornate as time went on. They placed this on their banners, on their livery coats. They may have their horses covered in some type of cloth so that you knew who this person was. So that if I couldn't see your face, I knew John Bridegroom was my friend because he had this specific shield, and I'm not going to attack him, and he's on my side. And maybe even our retainers, our men at arms would wear something that was similar to ours so that everybody knows, hey, these are our guys. Don't mess them up. However, we do see some things, and I threw it in there, that's kind of interesting. The Holy Bible in Numbers 1 and Numbers 2 talk about, and the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, every man by his own camp, I should say, every by his own camp, and every man by his own standard. And then every man of the children of Israel shall pitch his own standard with the ensign of their father's house. So even from the depictions of the Bible, we're already looking and saying there is some type of representation to talk to about either an individual or a family or a clan or something like that. So in modern heraldry, or even in medieval heraldry, this is sort of what you'd see and what we're normally used to. We get some type of symbols on a shield. They're not as ornate as the one that I showed you depicting the King Charles's armor and ensigns and so forth. So it was much easier to draw lines and squiggly lines and different shapes rather than having ornate animals, because it's too hard to pick that out. If I have 2 lions that are blue and John has 2 lions that are red, now I got to start remembering lions colors. It's much easier. Our minds think in shapes. So initially things were very, very easy to recognize. And the idea that this is one man, one coat of arms. There wasn't something that somebody else used. So they had to keep a very good detailed record of who was using what. So in that first shield with the 3 little red roundels and then a red on a field of yellow, red line on a field of yellow, you're looking and saying, no one else is going to have that. Maybe kind of similar, but no one else is have. That's my shield, mine alone. I mentioned in our introduction bucket shop heraldry, and I threw some examples here. Many of you have probably seen something like this. You've been in a mall or you've gotten something online where it says, hey, find your coat of arms. And then you put in your name, like me, and last name Gordon, and I put in my name Gordon, and a little coat of arms will come up, and it's got a nice little plaque that they'll send me with a bunch of stamps and seals, and it gives a whole history of the Gordon name, where it came from, and it says, here's your coat of arms. And maybe I even pay the extra $100 and get it depicted there, and it's got now myself and my wife, and we can put it up there like we've got 2 coats of arms. Unfortunately, that's completely false. First of all, you can't find your coat of arms anywhere, because unless you have been granted a coat of arms, it doesn't exist. And what you're finding and what they're finding is they've gone through history and they found a really cool looking coat of arms from somebody who had the name Gordon, and they put it as that's the family arms. But there's no such thing as family arms, because it was, as we just said, Arms are for one person and one person only. And there's no way to have a family coat of arms. So if you ever hear somebody go, oh, my family coat of arms, hint and a half, they don't know what they're talking about, and somebody bought them one of these things and it's hanging prominently displayed in their office or something like that. And really what they're doing is they're using somebody who just has their same last name, which is unfortunate because it is kind of easy to obtain arms, or at least get ones that are personalized to you. The way that happens is through the heraldic authorities. Now, the most common, and there's more than this, the most common and the two most common and prominent are those in the UK under Scotland and England. And it's the Court of Lord Lion, with Lord Lion, King of Arms, as the person who's in charge of that. That's the oldest court in existence and heraldic authority in existence that's still granting arms today. The English College of Arms, which is run by the Garter King of Arms. Then you have Ireland with the Chief Herald of Ireland. Spain is the Cronista Rey under the Spanish King. In Canada, they have the Canadian Heraldic Authority, which is relatively new. They broke away from the UK system a little while ago. And then you'd be surprised in England, in the United States, we actually have three. The bottom one there, the Institute of Heraldry, is under the Department of the Army. So I know I've got one or two. I know Hector Mirable, who is my buddy here in South Florida. He is a retired colonel, so he may have been familiar with this one, because any type of depiction of a coat of arms or symbol or anything like that that would define either a regiment or a battalion or something like that has to go through the Department of the Army. Even the other forces, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all that good stuff, they go through the Institute of Heraldry if they're trying to get some type of heraldic device or banner registered to them. Then we have the American Heraldry Society. It's an older society. It really focuses more on people who are involved in some of the other hereditary societies, like the Daughters of the American Revolution, Sons of the American Revolution, all these different things. But the one that's most like those from the UK, Ireland, Spain, and Canada is called the American College of Heraldry. It's actually, the president is a friend of mine, David Robert Wooten, really good guy. They don't grant arms, but they do register arms, and they do have heraldic artists and so forth. They're just like Scotland, England, Ireland, Spain, and Canada. They will go through the same process and register your arms, but they don't have any authority to grant. They're just a private organization. So granting of arms usually comes about because some type of fons honorum, or person who has the authority to grant you something, such as a queen, a king, is set up an organization like the Garter King of Arms, the College of Arms, or the Lion Court, or the Chief Herald of Ireland, or one of those things in their name to go through the process of granting arms to people who meet certain qualifications. So I just mentioned three terms: granting of arms and matriculating of arms. The third term is assumed arms or registered arms. So granting of arms is by a heraldic authority to an individual or corporation. So my father was granted arms. He was granted arms by the Lord Lion in Scotland. And upon his death, they matriculated to me. So I received what's called the undifferenced arms, which means immediately upon his death, I took over his arms and they now become mine, because he's no longer living. If I had a younger brother, my brother would also get arms, but they would be differenced in a little minor detail to demonstrate that he wasn't the firstborn son, that he was the secondborn son, and we'll talk about that. The third one is the assumed arms, and this is just something that was been adopted by somebody. So if you are a person who is a great artist and you just will sit down and draw yourself a coat of arms, and you use it and you say it's your coat of arms representing you, you're just assuming those arms are yours. You haven't been granted those arms. They haven't been matriculated from any source or anything. You have assumed those arms. Now, that doesn't mean you can't register them. It doesn't mean one day you can't say, well, wait a minute, I love these coat of arms. They're awesome. And I just figured out that I'm a member of the Sons of the American Revolution, and the guy who I'm tracing all the way back, he happened to come over here from England, and so he's an English subject back in the 1600s. I will then go to England and try to have those arms granted to me by virtue of that ancestor, and have them granted to that ancestor and then matriculated all the way down the line, and so on and so forth and so on. So there's a way to go ahead and do those, but there are really only three types of arms: those that are granted, those that are matriculated, and those that are assumed by a person. Now, when we talk about arms, a lot of people will say things like the crest. The crest is just that top portion of the arm which sits above the helm. That's a crest. And I'll show you some examples of those. They have you can see from this thing, the little wreath that goes on top of the helmet is called a torse or wreath. The helm is the helmet. The mantling is that nice little flowery stuff that would be a representation of the knight in his cloak flowing and so forth. We actually have the shield, which that's where the big thing, that's where the magic happens. We have the scroll and the motto down at the bottom. Now I will point out, the normal place, and I say normal, the place that's most common is to have that motto on a scroll below your shield. That is a tradition in Spain and Ireland, pretty much everywhere except in Scotland. Scotland places it above the shield, and there are examples of both somebody with a motto that's above and below the shield, but you're probably going to find it, if you see it above the shield, 95% of the time, 99% of the time, it's a Scottish grant or somebody whose heritage comes from Scotland, or it's below the shield, and then it's, you know, it's a gambit, and you sort of have to figure out, you really can't tell, because you can get two heraldic artists. One likes to draw it in the Spanish style, one likes to draw it in the Germanic style, one likes to draw it in the English style. It's the same thing. You're not going to be able to tell who actually granted it, because the artist just has basically a liking towards doing it one way or another. And I think somebody, Hector asked, so in the US, if we create with the American College of Heraldry, they would be considered assumed arms. They would be registered. So you sort of have some, almost like a copyright, but yeah, they'd be assumed arms. And then you could take those, and we've talked about this, since you have heritage from Spain, you could theoretically take those arms and go to Spain and say, hey, I'd like to have them granted to me. And they may use them exactly. They may say, we're going to tweak them a little because we want to be the ones to do it for you. And so they may just modify it just a tiny little bit. Now, just like in Masonry, there are certain things that have certain meanings, and I certainly don't want to go over a billion type of things, but I just want to tell you, if you were to go and get arms that were granted to you or something, these are some of the things that people think about when they're when they're doing this. So if you were to say, and you know, I'm just going to throw this out, and I'm going to pick on Hector because Hector and I probably see each other at least once or twice a week, and I know outside of the military, he was also in the police force down here in Miami. So if you look at this, you may say, well, wait a minute, blue, that is truth and loyalty. Boy, that really represents being a police officer, right? You got to be loyal, you got to be truthful, you're enforcing the law. But wait a minute, purple, that's really cool. That's got justice tagged to it. So maybe if he was developing his coat of arms, maybe he would start thinking about blue or whatever. Maybe he says, you know what? Nope, I like my military career. I want something red there. Or maybe I want white or silver, because even though I'm this warrior, I was in the military, really peace is the deal. So I want to do that. So just because you see these things doesn't mean it's there. Just like in Masonry, just because you see something, it doesn't always mean, I attended a talk years ago where somebody was talking about colors in Masonry, and basically he came down and said, well, the guy who invented the traffic light must have been a Mason, because he had red and yellow and green, and that's what this means. And I'm like, no, dude, that just picked those colors because it's easy to see, and then their contrast. It didn't have any esoteric meaning to a traffic light. So just because you see this doesn't mean that that's what's there. But a lot of times people will develop arms, or heraldic artists, when they're developing arms for somebody, will look to this, and based on what you've told them about you, or how your arm should be depicted, that's what's going to happen. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. This is an example of two things. One, the one on the left is the coat of the Marquis of Huntly. He is the head of the House of Gordon. Erroneously called the Clan Gordon. We're not a clan. We're not originally from Scotland, even though we came over many years ago. We're originally Norman, so we came over, and we were the Normans that came over and sort of conquered some little area, and they allowed us to stay and gave us a lot of good land and stuff like that. And sooner or later, he became a Marquis. There was even a Duke of Gordon at one time, but that line died out. If you notice, though, on the right, there's a little more simple, and that one is actually the coat of arms of the head of Gordon. The other one is the Marquis of Huntly with his other titles. In addition to being a Gordon, he's got some other titles, which those are depicted in the various quadrants. But if you were to go to that bucket shop heraldry and you typed in, and your name was like mine and it said Gordon, they would tell you this is your coat of arms, and that's not. And neither is the other one. And if we were in Scotland, if I tried to use either one, I could get fined, because in Scotland, they take their heraldry very seriously. The Court of Lord Lyon is a real court. You can be taken to court and brought up on charges and fined and all that good stuff. There's even a thing where Donald Trump tried to fly some flag that he had been flying down here at his house in Mar-a-Lago, and he took the same flag, which is like a heraldic banner, and tried to fly it over in the golf course he owns over there, and he got fined every day until he took it down and got it registered with the Court of Lord Lyon. So they don't like you flying flags that have not been approved by them, or using any type of heraldic devices unless it's been approved by them. But if you notice, these two crests, which are the stags, they are what I was mentioning. The science is that the crest is a stag. The art is the fact that it can be depicted in a bunch of different manners. And the one on the right, the stag is sort of facing to the left and has the motto above him. See, it's the motto Bidan, which means remaining faithful, or remaining true, or remaining loyal. It's also, if you look in this other one I mentioned, since it's Scottish, it's got the one on top. It's also got another motto. His secondary motto is below it. So you see the scroll up and above. But again, you see in this one, the crest is showing the stag facing forward. Looks much more like the Gordon Highlanders. If you looked at their cap badge, the military unit, the Gordon Highlanders, before their amalgamation with the Sutherland Highlanders and all the other ones back in the 90s, their cap badge would be depicting that crest, and so forth. And in Scotland, your crest can be worn by anybody. So I could take this and put it on a ring. I could put it on a stamp, because they say that the crest, as long as you're a member of the house or a clan, that can sort of be yours, and you usually wear it in a little buckle and put it on a cap badge, depicting that you're affiliated with that house or that clan. Now, I will show you mine. This is actually my coat of arms, devolved from my father. And so you see it's got some of the similarities. If we go back for a second, you'll see the 3 boar's heads. It's got the 3 boar's heads on a field of blue. It's a little different, though. And why is it a little different? Well, again, I'm not a direct descendant. I'm not part of that exact house. I can't trace my heritage right back to that first Gordon. I was probably more than likely can trace my heritage back to some poor guy who worked on the land of a Gordon, who over time just said, yeah, I'm a Gordon, like so many other people took the names of their lieges and so forth. And so I come from that area, and that's where my family comes from. And so I can use something very similar on my coat of arms. Now, I mentioned that this was a coat of arms that was for my father. It was originally granted to him. So let me give you a little example of how you give some information, and the people who grant the arms and actually develop it for you. So my father was a civil engineer, and he was a United States Marine in World War II. So when I was having my dad and I work with the heraldic artists, one of the things they said is, do you want things modern, or do you want things to look like it's an old coat of arms? So we said, we don't want anything modern, zero modern. Everything should look like it's been around for, a century or two. There's really no heraldic symbol for a civil engineer, somebody who's designing roads and so forth like that. But in the Middle Ages, somebody who was a designer or an engineer might be represented by the cogwheel. So the first thing they said is, okay, we're going to put the 3 boar's heads. We're not going to put them in that same order. We're going to put them straight up and down, but we're going to depict your profession as the cogwheel. We're going to put these little side flanges. So that represents my dad as a Gordon and as well as a civil engineer. Then for the crest, obviously I could have, but I didn't necessarily want to have my dad take the stag or some representation of that. So they asked him, well, what about your military career? Well, if you go back again, symbolically, we would say, okay, World War II was the whole world, the Allies against the Axis power, the axis of evil. So if you look in the heraldic literature, that is a wyvern. And a wyvern is the mythical creature that fights ultimate evil. And so if you think about it, what were we doing? We're fighting ultimate evil. We're fighting the Nazis. We're fighting the Imperial Japan. So that's the ultimate evil. So that depicts him and his career as a military man in World War II. Then his hobby was always reading. He loved to read, voracious reader. And he also, when they were asking him about his military service, he was very tight-lipped about it. He said, oh, I can give you this, I can give you that, I'll show you this. But, the guy who was the heraldic artist was asking a lot. He just was interested because his father served in World War II as well, but in the UK. But my dad really wasn't too vocal about it. And the guy said, "You're kind of tight-lipped about your service. You don't want to brag about the places you've been and things you've done." And he said, "Well, you shouldn't do that." So the book has a twofold reference. The book is supposed to be the book of good deeds that you have accomplished, and in this case, my father accomplished, but it's closed because it's for him to know. It's only for him to know. He knows what he did. He doesn't need to let everybody else know. But it's also a representation of the idea that he's a voracious reader, that he always thought education was important. Obviously, he pushed me and never saw me get my master's or doctorate, but he always had hoped that I would try to continue and go forward in my academic career. So if you looked at this depicts not me, not my son when I die, not his son, not 100 years from now, but the original grantee. Either something they did, something they were about, something that meant something in their life. And it's for me, now that they're my arms, I am to live up to these aspirations, these ideals. Very similar to Freemasonry. We look at the rituals we go through, and it's not that we did those deeds, even though in certain degrees we are depicted as being that character and supposedly going through those trials and tribulations, but we're supposed to live up to what that character did or that person in that degree did that we are receiving. So again, very similar in heraldry and in masonry, how what is actually there has some symbolic meaning that we're supposed to live up to. Now, these are two representations. I have a Scottish grant that was granted to my father. Most recently, though, I went to the Spanish Chronicler of Arms and asked for the king to matriculate my arms. So he didn't grant me arms, but he matriculated my arms so that they are registered in Spain and I'm allowed to use them in Spain. These are two different artists. So you can see the same coat of arms, just depicted differently. So if you were to take the Spanish grant and look at the words and put it up to the Scottish grant, if you could translate it, they would say the exact same thing. But the way the artist depicted it, you can see in one, they took the Spanish grant, putting the motto below. The shield is a little wider and so forth, not unlike the pointed English smaller shield. But even the wyvern, the one has a big robust chest and is sort of out there. The other one is a little more petite. So just different ways of looking at the coat of arms in two versions, but the meaning, the symbolism is still there. It's just represented differently. Now, this is my arms on the right, and the ones on the left, and the ones on the right are that of my son. Now, unfortunately, this was done by a friend of mine who just took a graphic design thing and dropped that little 3-pointed label on there. That label is a temporary mark of cadency. It basically says he's the firstborn son. So that's the label I bore when my dad was alive, and now my son's alive. If I was alive and he got married and had a son, so I have a grandson, my grandson would use the exact same arms, but just have a 5-pointed label and so forth and so on. If I had a second son, I would actually start going, and this is the English version. There's versions, and if you go to Canada and so forth, this is the English version. You'd put a temporary label of a little crescent or a star, or if you got all the way down to 9 sons, you'd have that 8-pointed star there. Boy, I guess families got really big back in those days. But that would depict who was which position in the birthing line of the male children. Now in Scotland, they do things a little different. It's a little more complicated. They do things you can see there over on that first generation, which is just the black line through the shield, and you go all the way over to the left. Firstborn son, just like we discussed with my arms, there it is. If you go all the way down, you can see that as long as you're the firstborn son, 5 generations later, when everybody's dead, you're the one that has the undifferenced arms. However, you can see how going through the secondborn son has that gold around it. And if you go a little bit down to the 5th generation, then there's another son that they've changed because he's the second son of that second son. It's got the little red. And if you go all over, they even have a thing for illegitimate sons. If you go all the way over to the right side, which is the blue and white going around the border there. So in Scotland, everybody has their own different way of differentiating the sons and daughters. Daughters are usually not on a shield. Women don't usually get theirs on a shield. Daughters get it on a little, what's called a lozenge, which is a diamond. And usually women will take theirs on an oval. That practice is going away a little bit. Many women now have it on a coat of arms, just like the men do and so forth. So it is a little complicated as you go forward and so forth. So if you ended up finding an ancestor that was way back in Scotland and you said, "Ooh, look, they've got a cool coat of arms. I can prove I'm related to them." Unless you're the absolute firstborn son of the firstborn son of the firstborn son all the way back, you'll get it granted to you, and they'll depict that ancestor, and then way down they're going to show yours, and it's going to look just a little different because they're going to differentiate it between how many times you were the second son and your father's father, and so forth and so on, all the way down until it gets to the right hatchments for you, where you got a specific depiction of where you are in the family tree, so to speak. Okay, so let's switch gears for a second here. We've talked a little bit about arms for an individual, and that's usually what we think of when we think about arms. But in Freemasonry, we don't really think of that, because Freemasonry is an organization, or in essence a corporation. So this is the depiction of the coat of arms for the Worshipful Company of Fletchers. I picked this one because I recently became a member of the Fletchers. It's one of the companies in London, the Worshipful Companies in London. They have the Worshipful Company of Fletchers, of Bowers, of eyeglass makers, of everything, every shape, form, tobacco makers, everything. And if they've been a worshipful company, they have a coat of arms that has normally been granted by the College of Arms in London. And this is the arms that are for the Fletchers, and they've been using these for a couple hundred years. They just got them re-granted because they were originally granted without supporters, and now you can see the two, it looks like half man and half woman holding a trumpet and also holding a bow and an arrow, are their supporters, and they were pretty recently granted those. I think in the last 20 or 30 years they were recently granted those, so now that's their thing. The reason why I bring this up is because if we look, there is a Worshipful Company of Masons, and they just celebrated their 550th year as a worshipful company. And you can see on the right side, there's their coat of arms. The one on the left, I'm sorry, the one on the right is their coat of arms, just depicted in a different way. If you notice though, it's got a compass right in the middle there, and it's got what looks like 3 buildings or 3 cathedrals or 3 castles and so forth. Now, when we look at the Grand Lodge of England, the moderns, boy, that sure looks like it. Not exact, but look at that. It's got the little middle there. It's got the square, or the compasses, not the square, but the compasses, and 3 buildings. And look at this. You've got what looks like 3 rook pieces. If I were to ask you, it looks like three chess pieces. And then it's got the compasses there. Now, if we take this and then we go, wait a minute, that was the moderns. Look at the ancients. The ancients did what they wanted. They said, you know what, this looks more like something out of a Royal Arch chapter, right? It's got the 4 banner flags that we would see in the Royal Arch, and it's even got the Ark of the Covenant above it. It's got the 2 angels or cherub as supporters and so forth. But what do we find when the 2 come together as the United Grand Lodge of England? Well, very much like we find when 2 major families marry into one another, the new coat of arms depicts both of them sort of side by side, taking up one half of the shield and the other half of the shield. And so that's what we have here in the United Grand Lodge of England's coat of arms, which is marshaled. That's called marshalling when you put it together. It's been marshaled together. So on the left side it shows the originals, the moderns, and on the right side it shows the ancients. I think I have another picture here showing. Oops, why am I not able to go forward? Okay, there we go. This is a side-by-side example of both the United Grand Lodge of England and the Worshipful Company. So you see it retains some of its original character from the Worshipful Company, from the actual stonemasons that they were trying to emulate. If we look at the United Grand Lodge of Scotland, very similar. These are both the same. They're just different, again, different artists, one showing supporters of masons wearing the Scottish aprons as opposed to just the coat of arms by itself. But you can see on the right side of this, it's a little clearer on the right side. It's got the Scottish saltire flag in the shield in the place of preeminence, and then it's got the Mason's symbol or Mason's arms from the actual Worshipful Company or the original stonemasons there, and it's depicted in that manner. We look at a different Grand Lodge. Now this happens to be New Zealand. Again, they've sort of put their almost like Scotland, they've got their, I think that's the Southern Cross, which we would see from either New Zealand or Australia if you looked up in the sky at night. And instead of, if we go back to this, if you see Scotland used that building, that stone wall there that looks like the rampart things. However, That's been replaced, and the crest is the all-seeing eye within the square and compasses. Now, we might want to talk a little bit about, just like children and the cadency we talked about, if we look into the provincial lodges, you're going to look and see in England the Provincial Grand Lodge of Essex. I threw Essex in there, not a member of Essex. That's where I ended up getting a degree. I went to school at the University of Essex, so I figured, you know what, I'll throw Essex in there. It's pretty cool. It looks just like the United Grand Lodge. It's take away that gold ring around it. I couldn't get that off of if that was on their website. But what they did is they border it in blue, very much like showing the cadency in Scotland where the borders are used. And they think they have, it looks like 3 scimitars, and that's very representative of what's in the Essex symbols. If you look over here at Cornwall, again, same exact thing, but they put the gold balls around it. If we look at the Provincial Grand Lodge of East Lancashire, same thing. The center is exactly the same, but they've differentiated themselves with the border going around. And then Wales, you can see both the lion and the Welsh dragon are being used for the Provincial Grand Lodge of that. As far as coat of arms for lodges, here we have Lodge Edinburgh #1 in Scotland. Again, looks very similar to what the Scottish one was, except instead of having the Scottish flag there, they've got what looks like a castle, probably Edinburgh Castle. Lodge Endeavour, I am a member of Lodge Endeavour in Australia. This one looks like nothing. This is again somebody, if you took that square and compasses out of the top part of the shield, you probably would never even know this is anything to do with Masonry, because it's got an open book, maybe a Bible, it's got a sword, it's got the rising sun. This could be a personal coat of arms, but because of that square and compasses, and maybe even with that square and compasses, you might say, well, maybe this is just a person. So you always can't determine whether it's a corporate arms or not. It could be an individual person's arms, but in this case, this is a lodge under Australia that is using that one. Now we're talking about individuals for a second here, because now we're talking about lodges. Let's jump back to individuals, and I've got a treat here because I know one of them is online. I was hoping both of them would be online tonight, but I did see, and I hope he's still here, our past Sovereign Grand Master, Matt Dupay. I've got 2 depictions, with their permission, of course, past Sovereign Grand Masters now of AMD in the United States. Both of these are their personal arms, and I'm going to tell you what's incorrect about one of them, or both of them, in a second. The first one is Glenn Cook's. He's on the left side there. That's his personal arms. You can tell it's in the Scottish style because it's got the motto on top. Again, the artist depicted by having the shield sort of on a tilt and so forth. I have no idea what those red boar's heads on a yellow field or gold field, nor do I know. I don't even know whether those are either. They could be. They might be unicorns. I don't know. They could be something else that's sort of fighting. I know that Glenn is a captain in the Navy. I know he is also a prominent lawyer and so forth. I don't know when these were designed, whether these were either designed for him or they were matriculated from an ancestor that he had. So I have no idea on that one. In the case of Matt Dupay's, this is an English grant. Now, something interesting on this English grant, and again, I also know Matt was a prominent lawyer and so forth. I have no idea what the scallop shells are, or any of the other, the blue and the red, not a clue. It looks like it's might be a gold beaver, if I'm not mistaken, if I can look in there real close, holding a weather vane. Again, have no idea what that means. Again, I don't know whether that's his personal arms that were developed for him, or whether those were matriculated from an ancestor. You'll notice, though, on the bottom of Matt's, he's got a depiction. It looks like a Maltese cross, and you're right, it is a Maltese cross. Within each one of between the arms, there's either a lion or a unicorn. That's because he's a member of the Venerable Order of St. John of Jerusalem, which is an order under I was going to just say the Queen of England, under the King of England. King Charles is the head of that order. Now, interestingly, I said I would point out the incorrect thing. Matt allowed me to use this prior to his getting promoted. If you look at this is a commander's neck ribbon when he was a commander in the Order of St. John. He has now been promoted to, and I think he was one of the last ones promoted by the Queen before her passing. He was promoted to full knight. Glenn is also a member of the order, and I also believe is a member of in the rank of commander, but his is not depicting, his shield that he allowed me to use doesn't depict that. So if I were to actually ask for Matt's current one, which I don't even know if he's had it redrawn, it would look something like this. This is not his shield, obviously, but he would have you see the neck ribbon is actually encircling the entire shield, and behind his shield he would have the Maltese cross if he wanted, or he could just depict it by having it going around. So it looks a little different if you see how that black neck ribbon is going all the way around the shield, as opposed to just being shown right there hanging, which is the depiction of a commander. Now, interestingly, as a knight of the order, he is afforded one of the opportunities, and this is, I'm showing you a depiction not of the chapel where the Venerable Order of St. John meets. This is actually the Garter Chapel, and you'll see, if you can look really closely, below each banner is a knight's stall. And the knight's stall is, during chapel services, that's where they sit. They sit right below in their stall, right below their banner. When they die, their banner comes down, and a depiction of their arms is made in brass on a brass plate and affixed to the back of the stall. So if you sit in that stall, you can see all the other people for hundreds of years who sat in that stall before you, and maybe one of them was a relative, maybe one of them was a family friend or a close associate or something like that. Most people do not have banners or flags, what is shown there. Most people have what I've depicted on the left side there, which is a guidon, and it can either be completely round, or it can come to a point like a pennon, or it can have two tails or one. In Scotland, it's very strict on who gets what, whether you're a knight, a normal armigerial person, which would be called an esquire, whether you have some type of, whether you're a duke or a marquis, and so forth and so on. Depends on what you get and what you're allowed to fly and what's granted and so forth. So I bring this up because many of you on this line are probably also a member of the St. Thomas of Acon. And if you look real hard in their bylaws and statutes, if you are armigerius, you can send your information in. I don't know who you get it sent into in the United States, but you are then authorized at meetings behind your station to have your flag. And so I'm hoping, if I can ever progress, I'm a couple away. If I can ever get to the top, maybe during my meeting, I'll send in my stuff so that I can have my flag standing behind me as I do the meeting. I actually, when I was Grand Commander of Florida, for those of you in Florida, if you came to the Grand Commandery meeting a couple of years ago, I had my flag behind me on the podium along with the Grand Commandery flag. And if you read any of the state inserts from Florida during my year, instead of seeing my ugly face, you'll see my coat of arms on all my things, because I was really proud that I was a knight that also had a coat of arms that I could, from Scotland, I could use. So that's my presentation for tonight. I threw a little bibliography in here that I can send everybody. These are great books to look at and so forth. I'll certainly take any questions. My main thing was to show you, not a massive discussion of heraldry per se, but to show you the similarities between heraldry and masonry, in the sense that there is this symbolism that represents something that in many cases we try to live up to, in many cases has many different meanings, depending on who is talking about it. And in almost every case can be depicted differently depending on who is discussing it, or in the case of heraldry, who's actually producing it on a piece of canvas or paper. And in masonry, what Grand Lodge has written the ritual and approved the ritual, because if you go from state to state, you get all these little variations, and that's just like in heraldry. It's saying the same thing, just depicted in a different way. And so I really want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. If anybody has any questions, I will be absolutely delighted to answer them, and thank you.
Excellent job, Brent. I really enjoyed that. I think that there was a ton of information in there, and it's a topic that has fascinated me for a long time, but I know very little about. So I really appreciate you sort of bringing that level of expertise to us and sharing that with us. I know we probably do have some questions. I know I have at least a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure.
Before we jump into the questions, I just wanted to take an opportunity, one, to thank you for being here and doing this presentation, but also to thank the Digital Strategy and Engagement Committee for the Grand Council of Allied Masonic Degrees, which is made up of Robert Johnson, Nick Samponia, Randy Sanders, Eric Diamond, James McNeely, and Michael Caravan. I believe that's all of them. And all of them had a little bit of a hand in trying to put this stuff together and keep this program rolling. And particularly Robert Johnson, who chairs that committee, did a great job of kind of putting this all together. So just want to thank those guys for everything that they're doing for the Grand Council of Allied Masonic Degrees. And hopefully everybody enjoys these presentations, and we'll have more of them in the future. So I'll just start off real quick.
Sure.
I had two questions that I kind of wrote as I was going. One was what are typically the characteristics that get depicted on a coat of arms? In other words, if I'm John and I want to get a coat of arms, would it be my job? Would it be my hobbies? Is it all of that? Is it whatever I want?
Yeah. So it's interesting because if you go to the American College of Heraldry, and anybody who wants to start off, that's actually where I started off with my dad and everything before going. And the one that if you look up in their records, it looks nothing like the one I got from Scotland, just because we were starting. And basically what they said is, tell us about yourself. And I did it for me. And they said, tell us about yourself and all this. Well, I told them my name, my mom's name. So my mom's name was Cooper. And so those of you who know what a Cooper is, they put the little metal bands around the beer thing. So there was a metal band on my coat of arms to sort of represent my mother on my coat of arms. And then they had the boar's head to represent my dad as a Gordon. And they had all sorts of things that they'll ask you questionnaires. And most of them will do that. They'll sort of ask you, or they'll even say, what are you thinking about? Interestingly, there's nothing that's specific. So you can tell them I want something modern. Like if I'm an artist, I want it could be anything. You could put what's that little palette that you put the little things on when you're painting. You could have that depicted on there if that's your choice. They might say, well, let's try to figure out something else that alludes to artistry that maybe the normal person, it wouldn't be so obvious. Sort of like Masonry. It's not obviously thrown in your face. We're going to sort of put something a little different there. The province of the Southeast for ACON, I'm working with the provincial head there because they're trying to get a provincial grant of arms from the college, but from the American College, because they want something to differentiate them as the Southeast province within ACON. So it really, to answer your question, there's nothing. They're going to ask you a million things. They'll come up with something and say, do you like it? And you go, no, I don't like that. And then they're going to go back and take other things. You like this? And then you just give them hints of what you like.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, actually I do. Am I being heard? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We got you.
Okay. So I'm curious. How do you, or why do you think America in general lost the aspect of the coat of arms? Do you think it was to get away from the principle, the English monarchy, or something else?
Yeah, two things. One, I would say, for sure, that sort of that whole aristocracy sort of fell out of favor. In England in today, I'm not going to say a commoner has it because it's a lot of money to do, and people are like, I don't care. But anybody can almost get a coat of arms. It just says you're not in trouble with the law, you're over 18, that type of stuff. You can petition for it. It's a lot of money, and it's always been a lot of money relative to what people make. So it was a thing in the old days of the aristocracy, or the gentry. Since that really wasn't the United States, we sort of fell away from it, I think. We also fell away from it because it would take a government office to grant the arms, because no one person, like the Fons Honorum in England, is now the king. So those things of the Canadian Heraldic Authority and all that used to fall under the king. Obviously Canada broke away and now it's a government office, but the College of Arms and the Lord Lion, they derived their powers from back when there were kings that originally started them and have always continued them going. Interestingly, though, prominent people in America's beginning history had a coat of arms. I mean, George Washington had a coat of arms. You can see his coat of arms if you look on the Purple Heart. That little coat of arms, that was his. So, it wasn't like we just said we're giving it up. It just sort of fell by the wayside because that wasn't our thing as we moved into a democratic republic.
Right. Yeah. Looks like Robert Johnson has his hand raised.
Yeah, Brett, thank you so much for this awesome presentation. What I found absolutely fascinating was not only just kind of the similarity in the way that we utilize the symbols in both of these respective arts, but also something that kind of triggered in my thinking is when you started to show some of the Grand Lodge coat of arms. it got me thinking about what we've seen here, at least, in and around the, I don't know, older valleys and the Scottish Rite, or even York Rite bodies, and to an extent, even certain Grand Lodges, just at the Grand Lodge jurisdictional level, have their own like flag. And when I say a flag or a banner, which really kind of, they remind me very much of a coat of arms because of the symbolry that they tend to use.
Right.
And for instance, like one of the newer lodges in the state of Illinois had a very traditional style banner done for their lodge, which had all the lodge's symbolry, and it was kind of a coat of arms for the lodge. And then we followed suit. My lodge, when we got chartered, we did the same thing. They used a different term for it, they called it a gonfalon. Okay, so which was really interesting. So I'm just curious, when in your expertise, in your travels, do you see many Grand Lodges with these types of, coats of arms or symbolic banners outside of Europe?
Sure. So I would certainly say no expertise on my end, very basic. But what I've noticed is, and especially in the United States, is our coat of arms is really our seal, right? Like if you look at the Grand Lodge of Florida's seal and what they have on their flag, they just took their seal and put it on the flag. And a lot of Grand Lodges do that. Like Pennsylvania, I think, might do that, even New York or something. Some of them get a little different, and they may depict it what looks like a seal, but it also has aspects of a coat of arms. Maybe it'll have supporters, either people or beasts on the side of it, supporting it like a shield would be, but it's still depicted in that round form, which is a seal, but it still could be considered a coat of arms. For me, it loses something. Like if you were to take my coat of arms and put it on a flag, it's in the flag shape. You don't see the shield. So if you were to take the coat of arms of a Grand Lodge and put it on a flag, and all you saw was what was on that seal or what was on it, that would, to me, would be more like, there's a heraldic banner. If you're just taking that and throwing it on this massive thing and you're putting the smaller version on it, it kind of loses it to me. That it's not really a heraldic flag. It's just a flag that you threw your coat of arms on. You don't depict the shield on a flag. You depict what's on the shield on the flag, for a true heraldic banner and so forth. But I think more and more Grand Lodges and local lodges are getting a little attuned to, hey, this is kind of cool. We should not follow the rules, but they're getting a little more help than just some guy who draws it up and goes, yep, this is it. And
yeah, right. Like making the typical, just taking the square and compass generic style and throwing it up on something, which I know is John Bridegroom's favorite.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, what's kind of funny, like when I first, because my dad and I were both Masons. I was lucky enough to, before he passed away, he was able to raise me. And so when we were doing this, I'm like, oh, you know what? We need to put something Masonry in there. And I'm like, let's put the skull and crossbones. This would be cool. And the guy's like, all right, moron. Skull and crossbones really don't show up on coats of arms. They do, but like very rarely. If you want to depict death, there's a lot of different ways to depict death without a skull and crossbones. So it's that little depiction. I mentioned I'm working with the provincial head for ACON for the Southeast, and he was giving me these ideas, and he says, hey, when you talk to the American College of Heraldry, why don't we put the 3 columns in there and everything? And I'm like, okay, those are some real, a person in Masonry would look at it and go, that Mason, but is that really what you want? Would that be something that would be on a nightly banner? So I'm trying to talk to the people at the American College of Heraldry and say, this is what those columns represent. What could we do that's maybe an animal or a beast or a symbol, rather than just 3 columns and a scallop shell? And it loses something when you're so verbatim. It's almost like ritual. If I tell you everything, it's kind of like, all right, that's boring. But if I weave it into this allegory, you got to think about it. It has a little more meaning to it.
I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about the organizational coat of arms. Indiana's Grand Lodge has a coat of arms that's separate from our seal. Nice. And it very much in the way that you described it, it is a lineage of where we come from. So you can see on this side is obviously, representative of the United Grand Lodge of England.
Right.
But then this is Scotland, this is Pennsylvania, this is Delaware, and I can't remember what this is, but I'd have to go back and look at the description. But the point is this is where we trace our lineage of how our Grand Lodge was formed.
Oh, that's perfect.
Which is pretty cool.
Perfect.
So
that is absolutely perfect. And so, some of these things are intuitive. You'd be like, oh man, I can tell that side is England. I can tell that's Scotland. I literally would not know that that's Pennsylvania. I mean, maybe I'm ignorant or whatever. I would just think, I wonder where that comes from. Is that like a Medusa head, as well as the other ones? Maybe the one that has the beehive and everything. Maybe that's more like, okay, there we go. That's real traditional Masonic symbols. But it's so cool that this is literally like a heritage. It's like a family tree, all depicted in one little thing. Yeah,
and they come from like I think this is from the Pennsylvania's Grand Lodge. That's their emblem. The Indian is either from their Grand Lodge logo or their state logo. I think it's their state logo though.
Okay.
So it's kind of pulling from different other aspects, which is like you said, it's kind of like it's not quite on the nose, right? It's like but interesting. So
right. That's very cool. I didn't know that. That's cool. I it's funny. I didn't even bother to look at Grand Lodges in the U.S. because I almost intuitively said, they're not going to have what I'm looking for. So everything was like England, provincial Grand Lodge. If I had known that would have been a great one for, I'll have to throw that one in for future presentations. That's really cool.
Yeah, you're right though. Like most places just use their seal, but we happened, and I think it was Dwight L. Smith that actually commissioned that coat of arms to be made some time ago, and originally was made only in black and white. And we actually went, and so the reason I became intimately aware of it is because I corrected it about 2 years ago. It was whoever colorized it didn't know what those things were and colorized it sort of randomly. And so we were using it colored, like the Scottish flag was red and blue, so once I found the description, I said, all these colors are wrong. And so we actually now it's correct. So
that's cool. Very cool. Awesome.
So, anybody else have any other questions? The only other question I had, Brett, was where typically would you use your coat of arms? Like, I mean, I know that you can use it in different organizations and things like that. Is that really what it's for primarily?
Yeah, so it's funny you asked that. I'm just going off screen here. So a while back, I had, because I work for a couple of different universities and so forth, I have university cards, and I'm like, I don't want to hand out my business card. So I know you can't see it, but that's my personal card. It just got my coat of arms on it. It's got my name, my phone number, my email, which will never change. So I just had 1,000 of these printed up, and I'm like, when people ask me, oh, here's my business card. Now it's getting kind of old because I guess everybody's using Link or all those other electronic cards. You just tap your phone. So
progress
is killing me. But that's what I used it for. As far as letterhead, I mean, whenever I write anything that's not business, I always put it on my personal letterhead, which has my coat of arms on it and things like that. If you look, like I've used, which maybe it's inappropriate or not, but if I turn off my camera, you'll see my crest, which is the top part of the coat of arms. I just have that as my saver for when I'm not online in a Zoom meeting and so forth. And people always go, oh man, what's that? What's that from? And I have to. It starts a whole conversation and so forth. I haven't used my flag other than when I go to the Scottish Highland Games or during my year as Grand Commander, and maybe if I make it to something in ACON, but I fly it on national holidays for under the American flag. I've flown it on like Scotland's when the Highland Games come or something like that. I take it, but really it's just more of a pride thing. It just sits in my house
wherever you'd want to represent yourself, right?
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So. And my son and I have both gone to a thing where he has his flag that has that little label on it. I have mine, and we're walking side by side. Somebody's like, "Oh, what?" Just a cool little thing.
Sure.
We've done it at scout camp before, where his tent has his and mine has mine.
So Eric Miner in the chat, Eric Miner asked a question: how unique can the traditional sectional design be before it pushes the validity from official heraldry organizations?
Okay, I can't speak for any of the organizations about what they will and will not do, but they try to get it pretty. They try to stay pretty true to form. They're not going to have something crazy out there. Again, I I would say things like, if you're going to depict yourself as a physician, you'd probably use that, the catechist, right? You wouldn't use you wouldn't use a stethoscope and a syringe on a coat of arms. It means the same thing. I mean, you must be a doctor. You got a syringe and a black bag and a stethoscope. They're going to go, no. We'd rather use a little thing with the snakes going around that everybody knows, and it's ancient. So it's not so much that that they wouldn't do it. It's just that they're gonna shy away and try to make it a little subdued. Again, they try to make it as simple as possible. So if you're trying to make your shield look like, the Prince of Persia, where it's got 16 different hatchments and quarterings and so forth, they're going to be like, what are you, a German prince from the 1800s? It may be, one or two areas, or maybe something like, if you remember Matt Dupay's shield or Glenn's shield, where it's like got two specific sections, or that with different things, or in Matt's, it's really just the reverse of everything. It's really two things, but they've sort of reversed the colors up and down, so it looks like four different things. But so they try to make it clean so that it looks clean.
And I think, and so in my limited involvement with it, some of it from ACON, there are some specific rules about what colors can butt up against other colors, and metallic colors against colors, like,
right.
So and that sort of thing.
There's strict rule, and like I said, there's strict rules. You'll find exceptions to them, but you usually don't put two colors together or two metals together. So silver and gold wouldn't be right next to another. It'd be separated a little bit. Like if you look on mine, it's got the two little flanches with gold, but then it's blue. So it's a metal, and then separated by a color and so forth. So there's a lot of little things that heraldic artists will say, I can't do that, but they'll make it work. If you tell them about yourself and what you're kind of looking for, they'll make it work, and it's really cool how they do it.
And then, so that kind of that does also lend you to start to understand how simplicity is better. In the graphic depiction, because you're not going to put a monster truck on there in full detail, right? You put a steering wheel, or whatever, like you said,
right. Yeah. And I mean, again, if you're the monster truck racer or a race car driver, you could put a Formula One car on there or a steering wheel on there, but they're probably going to go, you know what, wouldn't a cheetah be better? That represents speed.
Yeah.
That's, so there's just ways that you can make it look like it's old, even though it represents you in the new, whatever you're doing new. So it's really cool.
Right on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, then I will just say thank you so much for taking the time and spending an evening with us and sharing all this information. And you might end up getting some private emails from me about how to go about getting this done. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like I said, I'd be glad to help anybody. It's fairly easy if you can trace your ancestor back to the United Kingdom. It's even if it's like my dad, one generation away. You can get it in Scotland. Even if you weren't from Scotland, you can get it in Scotland. If you're in England, it's a little harder because they normally, if you're not born there, they give you an honorary grant. I think Matt is one of the only few people that I know that got an actual grant, and he wasn't born there. But other things, if you were born in Florida, because that used to be a Spanish colony, you can petition. Even if you have zero Spanish blood in you, you're from Poland, but you were born here. You can petition Spain for a grant of arms. So there's a lot of cool ways to get around things and get a legitimate grant of arms. So, but yeah, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate you asking the Grand Master if I could do this talk, and thanks for everybody for showing up. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, excellent. Right on. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here. We're going to let Brett get back to his life there in Florida. And hopefully you guys will join us for the next installment, which will probably be in the spring, I would think. So I think might be January, but we'll try and get everybody notified when that happens. So thanks again so much appreciate it. And we will talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You